And I couldn't believe it. Out came the horse.
Really?
Hey, we're live.
Whoa. Sorry.
All right. Hey, welcome to the Cloudists. My name is Jeff DeVerter.
I'm Kent Kingery.
We're the Cloudists.
We are.
Again, we're back here. Actually, again, we're here for our second time, but it's really the first episode.
The first official episode of the Cloudists.
I wish we had little poppers
and applause, and all that kind of
It'd be
stuff.
maybe we can put that in post.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome. Hey, so the Cloudists is, Kent and I have deployed more than our fair share of applications into clouds. We have built clouds. We have managed clouds. We have scores of people here where we work at our sponsor, Rackspace, who are in charge of making clouds run, make clouds run better. And the intent of this little netcast is for us to really kind of share some of those war wounds and opinions as it relates to what's going on in the news around cloudy stuff. A lot of cases, we're going to center a lot around Azure, but not holistically. And
yeah, if you wanted opinions, you have come to the right place. We get opinions. We get hundreds of opinions.
And we share them mostly for free.
And we do.
And then some tips and tricks. You've got some stuff up your sleeve. Even though it's rolled up. And then super excited for this first episode. We could have anybody come to our first official episode.
Anybody?
And we could have had anybody. Anybody we wanted.
Anybody.
So we had presidents, statesmen.
We could have had, President Donald Trump. We could have had any of those guys.
You know who we chose?
No, I don't.
I think you do, because we voted.
We voted?
There he is. Todd Klindt.
Democracy in action. Another democracy success story.
Make the Cloudists great again. Here we go.
From the beautiful corporate headquarters in
Ames,
Iowa. I am in the Rackspace headquarters in Ames, Iowa. Yeah.
That is fantastic.
Beautiful and sunny. Probably 25 degrees out.
Nice.
Fantastic. So Todd's been working with us at Rackspace for a number of years. I've known him for a number of years before that, and yet here he still is.
Still speaks to me. After all these years, Jeff still takes my phone calls.
Yep. We talk every couple of weeks, and sometimes about technology. So, let's get into it. Let's see what's going on. So let's start with in the news.
Let's talk
Kent,
about
you've done
Azure
some
news.
digging. What do you got?
Some Azure news. Let's talk about Azure today. So the first item up is now available. Your Azure invoices emailed direct to your inbox. Now that may not seem like a really exciting
an
thing.
invoice.
I know. We're thinking about it. But let me tell you that in talking to a lot of our customers, the single hardest thing they have is finding or getting notification that their invoices are ready to review.
Yeah.
Right? So now it's right in the portal. You can opt in per subscription using the subscription blade in the portal. And frankly, this is actually a big deal. You can also create multiple recipients for the email, so the thing can be blasted directly to your accounts payable department, directly blasted to your finance guys, whatever. So it may not seem like a big deal, but it is to many of our customers. This is the boring part of the cloud. So,
but a lot of times people don't necessarily think about all the nuances of what that relationship is going to be like. You think buy a car. Would be all right. It's always more painful than you really want it to be. Going to the cloud's supposed to be easy. Not everything's easy about the cloud. In this case, figuring out what the heck you're supposed to pay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Second item, Microsoft Azure Germany hasn't been around a huge amount of time.
No.
I think opened, but September of last year, I guess. Opened primarily because the need for customer data and related systems to reside in Germany, to be able to meet, some of the EU requirements around, data security, data sovereignty, et cetera. The data there is controlled by a German data trustee. Well, anyway, they announced this week they're expanding the services, and they've also boosted their compliance. So the new services they have out there is HD Insight on Linux.
Wow.
So HD Insight, right? Microsoft's branded version of Hadoop. Running on the Linux platform. They're also offering Power BI now, which is very near and dear to our heart with the analytics piece, et cetera. And then finally, they have mobile apps coming online as well, which is a big thing. Yep. And the compliance piece is really interesting too. They are now ISO 27001, which is the security policy and procedures thing for international. And then they also did ISO 27018, which is data protection, and again primarily around PII, and it's an international standard. So that's a big deal for that center.
Well, and it's huge for it too, because of course the whole reason you'd want to go and be a part of a data center in Germany. One, data restrictions, data privacy, huge in Germany. If you want to do business with anybody in Germany, you've got to be on site. You've got to be in the borders.
Well, and because Germany is part of the EU, that transfers across to the EU as well. So the EU data requirements can be satisfied by any EU country who's hosting it there in the Germany.
Which is big. Before that, where the closest was Dublin.
Correct.
Dublin.
Correct.
Closest we are, of course, from a rack space perspective, England, but deploying a Germany data center here
Correct.
shortly.
And then the final item, this is for kind of the data nerds.
Hey, I'm not done with this yet, though. Well, it's
if you start
exciting.
Speaking German, then we're going to have a problem. So.
Nine. So as exciting as data privacy is, what I think is actually very interesting is HD Insights, Power BI, and mobile apps, specifically the first two. So these are PaaS features, platform as a service features. These are things that you go and utilize a ton of infrastructure, a ton of application-y things to be able to get some serious value out of your cloud stuff. Now, what kind of stuff goes into an HD Insight? So what's going into Hadoop? I'm setting something up here.
I mean, all kinds of data can be put in there. I mean, if you think about, let's take energy production, right?
Yeah.
And all of that data coming from their SCADA systems, right? All that data being piped into this system, stored somewhere, and then pumped into HD Insight for the purposes of actually doing the analytics, being able to pull data, massage it, query it, et cetera.
Yeah. So the reason I asked this question is very specifically, this isn't how do I patch my Windows or Linux server. When you think about how do I manage and support this stuff. So, we think that this audience comes in a couple of different flavors. I've been talking to Benjamin, my 14-year-old, the other day. I said, well, a subset of something. And he goes, what's a subset? And I said, well, there's a superset, and then there's a subset, which is a smaller section. So when you think about all the people, the myriads who watch this, a subset would be people trying to make some decisions what they're going to do with cloud.
Right.
Or people who use cloud on a day-to-day basis, and they're trying to, get some insights from us, and not HD Insights, and figure out what it is that they're going to support and specialize in. So for that community, I would say, don't go figure out how to patch a Windows server better. But what you want to think about is how you're providing value to these higher order, higher level type of activities. And to the decision maker, the IT decision maker, I would state, look for a service provider or people who are going to help with these higher order things. Systems start to patch themselves these days. You don't have to pay a lot of attention to that.
And the reality is, you were talking about patching a Windows server, but as we're going to talk about in a few minutes, right, the era is upon us, right, where we're not even going to have the servers to deal with anymore.
Ooh, segue, man.
Yeah,
all right. So as you're looking at the clouds that you're going to choose to run your business on, look for those ones that aren't just giving you some infrastructure. You're looking for higher order things that can create great value around not only a place to run your application or your stuff, but also information about your information.
Right. All right, one more quick one for the data nerds in the audience. There is now a database query editor for Azure SQL Database in the portal. So let me tell you, having worked with Azure SQL Database a lot, the whole issue of having to open a firewall, be able to connect SQL Server Management Studio, all that kind of stuff, that's a big pain in the neck.
All right.
Having the query editor directly in the portal means I can get to the portal. It's browser-based. I can do all my selects.
And is it full features and everything?
Absolutely. Everything.
So no longer having to get the Fat Studio and connect.
Absolutely. There may be some things that are easier with the studio, but frankly, just to be able to go in and create a table or update an index or do things like that, all right there in the portal.
So you spent a bunch of time with AWS as well. Is there a similar construct over there?
There probably is. I'm not as familiar with their querying tools. I know that on top of a lot of their databases, they do have browser-based, especially around MySQL, because those kinds of tools have been there for a long time.
So as Todd would attest to, we're not the smartest people in the world, but we are teachable. So Kent at thecloudist.com or Jeff at thecloudist.com. If you are smart about AWS, educate us. Send us an email.
Absolutely.
Or Todd at Klindt.com.
Todd at Klindt.org, yeah.
.org.
And I will absolutely back up Jeff's assertion that neither he nor Kent are very smart. I've known them both for years. I respect you. I agree with you, Jeff.
Wait. You said we could have had anybody.
Anybody. I lost a bet.
Yes,
all right.
All right.
So cool. That's awesome. So query editor now directly inside of the portal.
Yep. And that's the news. I mean, at least that's important to us.
All right. So here's another thing I want to do in news. And I just went over to the Googles and news.google and I typed in Azure. Let's see what shows up on the third page. We'll call this front page news.
Okay.
So the thing that really caught my eye when I did this before is Microsoft's Azure cloud revenue estimated at Todd and Kent get to each make a guess. What do we think that Azure, pure Azure, not 365 running on Azure, not CRM running on Azure? What is Azure's revenue?
$2 billion. $2 billion US.
Okay. Todd.
26.1 billion.
0.1. The more specific somebody is, the more a liar they are, in case you didn't know that.
I think the whole game, Todd, was to be close without going over.
And, he had a computer. He could have done this search while we were talking, too. And
I would never do such a thing. I respect you guys too much.
3 billion. 3 billion is the estimate. estimate, because they
Wow.
don't actually report
Yeah,
that number. So just
right.
sort of what people think. All right, that's what's top of page.
Okay.
Your Germany showed up there as well. So
Yeah.
maybe that's where I found it.
Your Germany is showing, Kent. Watch out.
All right. So news. That's the news that we know of this week in Azure space. With that, takes us to the next segment, our second segment. We'll try to keep it a little bit shorter as well, because we're all excited what Todd has for us today.
Oh yeah, sure we are. I mean, yes, we are.
Yes, we absolutely
Yes,
are.
we are.
Yeah. So you've prepared a little something
Yep.
for us.
Just a quick overview or a quick discussion around serverless computing.
Isn't that an oxymoron?
That's like the big buzzword, right? Serverless.
It's like saying
computing.
Todd is smart.
Yeah. Serverless computing. I mean, and we're going to talk specifically about Azure Functions. Azure Functions.
Serverless computing as enabled by Azure Functions.
Yep.
Teach us.
So the big question is obviously, what is serverless computing? I mean, right? Because obviously there's computers somewhere. Of course there are servers, right? What's the thing you told me? The cloud is just somebody else's computer.
That's right.
You aren't aware of the servers though with serverless computing. Even in PaaS offerings like web apps in Azure or things that are similar, and especially in IaaS type offerings, you definitely aware of the servers. You definitely aware they're there. You got to know about configuring them. You have to maintain them, patch them, etc. Here it is literally, there is nothing there other than the function. So what's so great about it? Well, the Azure function capability gives you a lot of different languages to deploy these functions, and that's really what you're doing. Think of a single little function like adding two numbers together or looking up a value in a table. We're way past microservices. We're almost down to the sort of the nano
Like here's a line.
Yeah, exactly right. So I just want a single value back, or a unit of measure, what happens to be. Languages that you can do this in Azure Functions: C#, F#, Node.js, Python, PHP, Batch. You can do Bash type stuff. You can actually run an exe. I have an Azure function that's literally just a console exe that's running inside Azure.
So what calls an Azure function?
So it can be a number of things. You can do it based on a timer. You can do it based on a call into a URL. You can have it watch a service bus queue or a topic, something like that. So there's a number of ways that it can be kicked off. But what's really, really cool about it is a pay-per-use pricing model.
Really?
It's not a pay per hour or pay per day.
Individual. By the drink.
Literally by the call to the function. So if I have 10 calls to the function to add two numbers together, I get billed for those 10 calls. I get billed for
regardless of size of function, time it takes.
Correct. So there is resource consumption for this, which you can consume resources up to, I think, 1.5 gig of memory to be able to, operate. Most Azure functions are very, very small. And then there's execution. And what's interesting is the first million executions of your function are included free every month. First million. And get this, the resource consumption is done based on the idea of a gigabyte second, which is how many seconds versus how many gigs, et cetera. 400,000 gigabyte seconds included with the capability.
Gigabytes. I've never heard of a
so
gigabyte
I saw an example of pricing in here where they showed something like 3 or 4 million executions of a fairly routine type function a month. Total cost was under $40 a month.
That's sort of insane.
Under
Talk
40.
about being able to take granular control of your code base, of your application, your service, your thing, down to the nth degree.
Right. Well, and there's no, as far as I can tell, there's no ingress and egress charges for the data like there is for storage accounts, things of that nature, right? So there's none of that going on. I mean, literally it is, how long did it execute? How much resource did it take while it was executing, multiplied by like 0.0000016.
So even in the instance where this function is writing, some sort of data off to a data lake somewhere. No egress.
Yeah, no, because if you're writing internally, right, you're not leaving the Azure space anyway.
But I've come in to make that request. Or maybe I've come in. Maybe I've come in. Maybe it's happening internally based on an action.
You can bring your own dependency stuff. So things like NuGet packages, NPM, you can bring in your own stuff if you want to. So if you have company libraries that are being done in NuGet, or you have NPM for Node.js that you're using, you can bring that in. There's integrated security. So every single one of the major providers, Azure AD, Facebook, Google, Twitter, your Microsoft Live account, all those things are capable of securing the function.
Really?
It's
so
really
embedded into your Facebook page.
Absolutely. And
how many times people click on Todd's profile?
And you can code the functions right in the portal. So literally, you don't even have to own Visual Studio. You don't have to have anything. You literally can open up an editor in the portal. In fact, our intern, who happens to be sitting in the production and training session right in the other room over there.
The pit. We call it the pit.
The pit. Our intern has actually done some work with these Azure functions. He's not listening at all. No. But he's been experimenting with this and is able to like code these functions straight in the browser, never opening Visual Studio, never doing anything, and having it work.
All right, Todd, having listened to this, how would you use an Azure function?
Well, I'm a SharePoint guy by heart, and I was just watching. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and the Microsoft Cloud Show guys, Andrew Connell and Chris Johnson, had somebody on last week talk about that, Doug Ware. And so whenever I think of anything, it's that whole, when all you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so when I think of things like this come out, I'm like, how can I work this into SharePoint things or Azure things? And so I'm looking at things like, how does this integrate with Power Apps? How can I or Flow, or all these things that are coming out that are working their way into my Office 365. How can I, and I'm like your intern, I can't really program. Visual Studio scares the snot out of me.
Pronounce it.
So what I'm waiting for is another month or so when there's some of this good Azure function code out on the internet that I can just steal and then go through and replace the things that I want to do, and then figure out how I can work them into things I'm already looking at, Power Apps and those kind of things. It's
interesting you bring that up because there are a ton of pre-canned functions that are out there. I mean, things really sophisticated things like facial recognition and photographs. That's actually a function. You literally send it an image over a REST call and it will do facial recognition against a known database and bring it back. It's impressive stuff. And so you can literally go in and find a function, right? Put it in your environment and then edit it and change it to your heart's content, however you want to use it. And one final thing before we leave this topic, here's the really cool part. The functions runtime, the thing that's under the covers that actually runs this whole thing, is open source. The entire thing's available on GitHub. So that brings up the specter of being able to put that on premise. It brings up the specter of being able to host it in other cloud environments. So think about it, right? You could run Azure Functions at the function runtime in AWS, right? I mean, that
sounds like blasphemy.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Or in Germany.
Or Germany.
Right. So seriously, because we have a lot of data sovereignty things. As a hosting company, we deal with this all the time, customers in Canada and customers in Germany. So now, if they're going to be doing these functions on sensitive data, just make a copy of that GitHub repo and run it locally.
You bet.
That's awesome.
So, anyway,
all right, Azure Functions. I know what I'm doing.
We'll have more link. We'll have a link in the show notes to the page where you can see more about that.
Awesome. If you have some information about functions, some cool things that you've done with them, send it to either Jeff or Kent at thecloudist.com. And who knows? Maybe you'll get to come on here and talk to us about it. That'd be fun.
Dare to dream, right?
Dare to dream.
And now that I've been on here, my career has peaked. I mean, it's all downhill from here. I just, so be careful what you ask for, Azure Function folks.
I don't know. I was actually thinking that now that you've been on, the bar's been set pretty low, but did I use my outdoor voice? Sorry.
That's your attitude.
That's awesome. It's only uphill for you guys, downhill for me. Right. only one way to go for you.
I don't know. Remember, benefits of a classical education, Sisyphus was pushing a rock uphill. So that's right. Yeah.
That's awesome. All right. I feel like we've beaten this horse. Let's so I'm going to talk about Todd in a kind way now. So we're going to really change things.
Oh, okay. This is where you lose all credibility.
Exactly.
For those that know Todd. So I got to know Todd back, of course, in my SharePoint days. That was my really foundation in coming to Rackspace, and even before Rackspace, knew him and Shane and that merry cast of characters who ran around teaching us how awesome SharePoint could be.
The SharePoint mafia.
And Todd would always say, hey, you kind of keep us at arm's length. You hosting guys, you're trying to take our jobs. And then, you were working for SharePoint 911, and then we thought maybe this would be a good idea to bring you guys in here. And you're like, do you mean I have to like hosting now? So I'm going to drop this story off right there and let you know.
So Jeff and I, again, we've known each other forever, and we have a number of these stories where Jeff tells me something, and I tell Jeff that he's full of it, and then Jeff was not full of it. One of the things about Jeff is apparently a mind like a steel trap is another one of his things. So yeah, that was absolutely the case. When it comes to insulting me, and apparently,
that's just a good notebook.
Yeah. So, I mean, so you got to think of the time frame. This was back in 2011, 2012, when we were having some of these discussions. And so Shane and I would be speaking at Tech Ed or whatever, and people would say, I want to host this, or I want to virtualize that. We would laugh, and we would catch our breaths and laugh some more. And I will stick to the fact that at that time, that information was probably correct. But the landscape has changed so tremendously. And I do remember when I came on board at Rackspace 5 years ago, with my, hosting is for suckers attitude.
You had a t-shirt too, I think.
Yeah, probably printed everywhere. You guys brought me into a little room and kind of gave me the come to Jesus speech. And it wasn't, now you work here, you got to like it. It was, here's all the things you haven't thought about, and here's all the reasons why hosting does make a lot of good sense. And I'm like, that's got some merit. That's got some, and it made me look at a lot of different things, where the roadmap of where my industry was going to go, what was best for the customer. And it was, it was a very educational thing, but I absolutely have changed my tune. I don't.
Well, getting that paycheck every couple of weeks didn't hurt either.
Funny how that changes the attitude.
It wasn't the paycheck, because we brought Todd in and we said, look, here's what I think we'll pay you, and we had this cool thing here called a bonus, and you went, don't even tell me, I want to know the number, because I've had companies where they said I was going to get one, never got it, and I said, all right, I'll see you in 3 months.
The logo imprint pencil. That's right.
So that is absolutely true. We had that exact conversation, and I told Jeff, I'm like, in my head, those bonuses are exactly zero, because I've worked for too many companies and I bet for 2 years when we would get our quarterly bonuses, Jeff would send me an email. So how's that zero bonus treating you there, smart guy? But in my defense,
it really was a zero bonus.
But in my defense, if I'm going to be wrong about something, it's going to be how big that's
absolutely
well done. So we started back telling this whole story for a reason, because Todd went through a transition of his brain thinking hosting's for suckers to, hey, maybe there's some merit, because you just have to think about this in a different way, and it sort of makes sense. So Todd, continue with the story, because it doesn't end there. Wait, there's more.
Yeah. So I went through a fun transition, not some of the other kind of transitions we hear about in the news. But I'm an IT pro and working, I love getting in there and installing SQL and installing AD and wiring it up with SharePoint, just making crazy things happen. But I kind of saw the writing on the wall, and I saw that things were changing. And I remember back in the day, I used to make fun of Office 365 and SharePoint Online, and we would go talk to customers, and they would say, well, instead of hosting at Rackspace, should we use Office 365? And then we would laugh again, and we're like, Office 365, are you kidding?
Then we catch our breath, then we laugh.
Yeah, exactly. Wipe the tears. That's not the case anymore. About 3 years ago, Office 365, I woke up one morning and I'm like, I can't make fun of this anymore. All the list of things that I had, the list is gone. And so that's when it kind of hit me that this was a thing, this cloud, this hosting, this Azure, this Office 365. And also the idea that I was going to be able to work through retirement, installing SQL and installing SharePoint and patching SharePoint probably was not going to be the case. And I was at a talk at Rackspace once, and one of the VPs there, Van Lindbergh, did a talk, and he was talking about how we always have to grow our skills. We can't get complacent. And he said, we all know that guy that in the 90s got huge paychecks because he could install Linux. And we're like, where is that guy now? Nobody's making big money installing Linux anymore. And so I'm like, yeah, that's me. I'm going to become a dinosaur. And I remember going to Ignite last year in Chicago, I guess 2 years ago now, Ignite 2015 in Chicago, and sitting down and drinking that Microsoft Kool-Aid. And it wasn't even by the cup or by the pitcher. I had the whole bowl, and I was just drinking, had a big Kool-Aid smile. And it was all about, Windows 2016 when it was coming out and the cloud and all that. And I remember driving home, because it was in Chicago and I'm here in Iowa. And I remember thinking two things, that it was a great time to be in Microsoft technologies. They were, coming out of the Ballmer era and just had shed every skin of the previous Microsoft, open source this and Linux that. And I remember thinking, what a great time to be in Microsoft technologies. And then I looked at my particular skill set and what we were doing at Rackspace, and I thought, we're screwed. We can't stick with this mindset. This idea that we're going to spin up servers and host SharePoint for people. And so I started thinking through, what this meant for me as a career and what this meant for our customers, and how I could talk Rackspace into making a job for me and a good product for our customers. And it came down to hybrid, and it came down to all those things. But the foundation of all that was identity. And at that point in time, Rackspace didn't have an identity story. And so I remember thinking we need to convince all of our dedicated SharePoint hosted customers, our bread and butter, that they need to start looking at Office 365. And for them to do that and have it not just suck.
Yeah. So there's some remedials in the audience, maybe some behind the table, to even define what identity means. Right. I mean, let's
Yeah. So I think for IT pros, as guys like me, the bit slingers, as we start whining about our jobs going away, this is one of those new frontiers that we can embrace. In the context of what we were doing and what we are doing, identity is this idea that we all have Windows Active Directories on-prem. It's the thing that our SharePoint folks log in with and all that. And taking that identity and making it your identity over multiple services. So in this case, we're talking Office 365, SharePoint Online, Exchange Online. But now as a user, I don't have to worry about what I'm logging into and how I'm logging into it, that it's all one user base everywhere, same username, same password, same policies, all that one central place for the IT nerds to control it. I don't want to give my mom another username and password. And so having this and having it make sense and having it be secure. And that was something that a story we didn't have at Rackspace 2 years ago.
Right. Well, so now help me understand though, because I've been around the Microsoft ecosystem a really long time.
You have, yeah.
Active Directory's been around for a long time. And I can remember being in organizations where you used your domain credentials to log into everything, to log into Exchange, to log into SharePoint, to log into all these things. So what's different now than it used to be back in the day when everything was kind of on your own network and you were using domain credentials?
Yeah, the cloud has happened. And so a great example of your situation was, 10 years ago, I worked as a SharePoint administrator and we had a great SharePoint farm, if I do say so myself. And we wanted to share some of that content with external folks, suppliers, customers, whatever. And so we had this thing. What do? Do we create domain accounts like the ones you were talking about? Well, that gets us right in. Everybody knows how to use that. But now they have an account on our network. And now if they sneak into the office, they can sit down at a desk. Anything else that we have that's web facing, potentially they can try to get into it.
And you have to pay for it.
Yeah, and all that. And so kind of the next generation of identity is this idea that you don't have to have a separate username and password for all these different systems that you use, that you can set up a way for these systems to trust each other and federate with each other. And so for customers, we say you've got this Windows Active Directory, your folks maintain this. When you create new users or create new employees, you have a process, keep using that same process. But now Office 365 is going to be able to use it. And once you get into Azure AD, well, then Box can use it. And Dropbox can use it, and GoToMeeting can use it, and it's the same username and password everywhere. And if you shut it off in one place, it shuts off everywhere. If they change the password in one place, it's changed everywhere, and it's secure.
Okay, so no more when an employee leaves, I got to figure out how many of the 10 or 15 SaaS offerings we're using. I got to go shut every one of those guys off.
Exactly.
Right.
All right.
Yeah, one of the many things, and part of the other thing is we've taken away this idea that it's just username and password. Now we have this idea of claims, attributes about a person, so we can make decisions based on that. And I think identity it's very complicated. And again, there is no higher security probably than identity, because if I can figure out somebody's identity and pretend to be them, I can get into anything. So not only it's that balance of increased functionality, but man, keeping an eye on the bad guys and making sure they don't get in and do man-in-the-middle attacks or impersonation attacks or anything like that.
So this sounds like it's not, it's just not a Microsoft, sort of focused thing anymore. I mean, even though I know
what Microsoft is though.
Yeah, right. I mean, when I think about how we're implementing identity for a lot of our customers, right? Yes. It's usually Azure AD coupled with on-site AD. But I'm assuming that like Linux can play in here and other types of systems. I mean, it's kind of cross-platform. I mean,
that's part of it. So figuring out, getting everybody in a room together, Microsoft and the Penguins and all those folks, and agreeing on some standards, because that's what makes this work. So it's not enough for this identity to work with all the Microsoft stuff. Like you said, we've had really close to that for a long time. That's not impressive. But this idea that once we get an identity into Azure AD, now all these other companies can use it. And the examples I give are some of the typical SaaS stuff, Dropbox and Box and all those kind of things. They have all signed on to the same thing. The other thing, and I don't know that we do a lot with this, but not only can other companies consume Microsoft identities, Microsoft products can consume identities from other providers. And so if you're using another identity provider like Ping or Okta or something like that, you can actually use that to log into Office 365 and all these other things. And that's again, it gives great control, great security. Everybody's kind of got their own little take on it, but it all works together.
Okay.
It's almost like Microsoft has realized that they have to play well with others.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is, again, the Microsoft of 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
It just doesn't exist. But the interesting thing, though, you go back 5 years, you got to know there's whiteboards strewn with this information that we're now just bantering about. Easy. Just like it's easy. All right. So that's a great, overall, and even to some point, it's just conceptual. So it took you a lot to get Rackspace, and there's been a lot of people involved, but you really, lit the torch and carried it for a while because you realized you need to get product people at Rackspace who are involved in creating things that serve our customers. You needed to get internal architects and IT inside of Rackspace on board with this kind of stuff. Yeah. Maybe a couple of ideas, some of this, where did you skin your knee? What worked well? People need help.
I learned slowly, so I almost wish I had more knees because of how skinned my current knees are. But for
patches, like your mom would tell us.
Exactly, elbows. For us inside of Rackspace and for our customer base, being in the SharePoint and Exchange world, our customer base is usually very Microsoft centric, and they've got different ideas about how things should work. And so this idea of interoperability was a tough sell at Rackspace at the time, and for our customers to understand the value of all this. So if I would talk to one of our customers and say, we should do this thing and it should cost X amount of money and all that, but in the end, you'll be able to sign into Box easier. They're like, well, I don't care about that. We got a guy, he manages Box, it's all good. And I'm like, but you don't need that guy to do that anymore. That guy can go do something else. He can go help figure out a better way to make sprockets or something. I don't know.
Interesting.
So there was this mind shift, and then explaining it to people and have them understand. Like I could steal all the best Microsoft slides, and I did, that showed how all this worked. But until I could wrap a story around it and explain it to our folks so that they could understand it, and our sales folks and explain it, there had to be a story, and getting that figured out and trying to figure out what resonated with people was the tough part.
Well, and it was hard. You had a glimpse behind the curtain yourself. You knew kind of where we needed to go, but you just had a bunch of tin men you're trying to convince that there's something better out there.
Well, I was thinking about him telling the story of showing up and thinking hosting. Good heavens! And I showed up, and one of the first things you guys talked to me about was identity, and I'm like, identity? Come on! Right?
Who's the idiot who came up with that idea?
I mean, I didn't come here to deal with identity, and then all of a sudden, I did hear the story, and it's incredibly compelling. Right, because I did live through all those, eras and years of, oh, I can't connect to that thing. Oh, here is your extra password for this thing, or here is your identity to be able to use for that.
I have a lot of opportunity to get out and talk to a lot of customers in the early days, help with architecture and whatnot. And I'll start to tell a little bit of the identity story, and I say, well, we'll do this for you, and it'll do this to this. And ultimately, the reaction is, or the net is, because I had these great stories that Todd wrote, is that now. Now when a user sits down or when you administer the stuff, you can still use Salesforce, you can still use Concur, you're going to manage through a single portal, you're going to be able to track and manage those licenses. And all you have to do is get in and figure out an identity strategy over time. You need to figure out what's broken now, because you don't know how much is broken. In fact, the story I would always use is say, your Active Directory isn't right. It's like your garage. You've got in your garage, you've got fragments of every hobby you've ever had. Why is it there? Because you don't have any pain. You don't have to really get rid of it. Well, now you've got to get in and clean up your Active Directory in order for ADFS and AD Sync and things like that to work appropriately and consistently. And then you get the stuff. And I get halfway through that spiel and to be like, here, where do I sign? Just please take it. When can we schedule this event?
That rustling sound you hear is money crawling out of my pocket.
And one of the things, and I feel like kind of a bad person doing it, but one of the greatest benefits of this is security. So if I ever needed to get somebody just over that line, I would start talking about security. And everybody is terrified about being hacked or being all that. And the functionality that they add to this is just amazing. So I've worked at companies that decided to implement two-factor years ago. So two-factor, for those of you that haven't had to play with it yet, is something like your password, and something you have, it's like this fob, or as I like to explain it, something I can forget and something I can lose. But either way, two-factor.
I got to write that down.
Yes. But the idea, so if 10 years ago, if you needed to do this, you need to buy a bunch of hardware to sync up with the fobs, and you need to pay licensing and enroll. It was just this huge thing, cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, would take months and months and months. That's all built into Azure AD. And so now if we're sitting at a customer and they're like, there's been these freak attacks and we think we need to implement two-factor authentication, what's it going to take? I'm going to say, well, and I would sit back and quote the many hours and and then I would go back and watch some funny cat videos. There's some videos of pandas sneezing on the internet. That might be my new favorite thing. But then I just log into Azure AD and I click the box next to the user that says multi-factor authentication. I say, yeah, just text him on his cell phone because his cell phone's in there. It's all coming from AD. And they're two-factor auth just that easily. And if you're not skewed for it, it might cost another $5 a month. No hardware outlay, no waiting, as secure as you need to be. And the other thing, if I got time for another story, is all of Microsoft's identities are under one team now. So Azure AD, Live ID, Xbox gamer tags is all one identity team. And so those guys live and breathe identity and security. And there was one of the many password breaches last year. That team came out and talked about that. And they said, I forget all the numbers now, but basically they said before that breach was public, we already knew about it. We already knew about it because number one, we sort of have a gentleman's agreement between a lot of these big folks. And number two, we've got some security folks that hang out in some pretty unsavory pieces of the internet. And they've already had that list. And they said, but when we got that list, weeks, months ago, whenever, we checked it against all of our identities because it's all under one umbrella. There's not, people that get forgotten. They said, okay, about half of those usernames existed in properties that we had. So we went to those usernames and said, okay, this password, is it the same? And some percentage of those passwords were the same. So they knew that at some point this list was going to go out, and there was some number of those usernames and passwords that bad guys could use to get in to Microsoft properties. They said, but by the time we got down to that far, our heuristics had already caught over half of those accounts as having weird things going on. They said, so we had already caught it, and the stuff's all automated. So it's not them freaking out. They've got things in place that say, okay, Kent's sign in is trying to sign into a My Little Pony fan club page. That makes sense. That's all good. That's very consistent with his behavior, again. But now it's logged into some, hot rod site or something. That's a little weird. Not going to freak out, though. We're just going to prompt him for two-factor auth. We're just going to say, hey, we need to send you this thing. If it's really Kent, he gets out his My Little Pony encrusted phone. It's got the little case on it. He puts in the 6-digit code. He's in, and he's good to go. If it's not Kent, if it's some bad guy, he's done. He stopped. And nobody at Microsoft got involved. Kent didn't get involved. Those are the things that are already in place.
The systems just worked.
Yeah.
Right. And so when we talk to customers about moving into identity, they say, but that's not secure. Our usernames and passwords are out in the cloud. And I tell them these stories, and they're like, yeah, our guys would have never caught that. And it's just the way the future, my career has been always just moving things out that I don't want to deal with anymore. So I can do the thing that I really want to do. Sure. And identity has kind of been that. And I didn't realize it, but it kind of is. And so that's one of those things we can move out to them now.
Well, it's the cost of entry. It's something you have to solve for if you're going to use cloud services in any fashion, something as easy as Box or a little more in depth in 365 or any of them. Put some websites out there and I want to administer those websites. You got to have an identity strategy.
Look, it's the foundational pieces right now to move to the cloud. I mean, it's one of the basic pillars that you have to have in order to get there.
Yeah.
So
our sponsor, Rackspace, has a killer service around this. So just feel free to reach out. Go to rackspace.com. Some smart people there will help get directed where you need to be. And his name
and let me talk about those smart people. So I had this great identity idea, and I went around, told the story, all that. And then there was a guy at Rackspace, Ben. I started telling him and realized that he knows about 1 billion times more than I do about it. And I had to step back. I'm like, I have no business in this product with him in the room.
Which is great. You help move us forward. You got the right guys involved, and allow you to go back to focus on, if it's SharePoint, if it's whatever.
Whatever it is that I do, yeah.
Being the administrator of mylittlepony.com. So Kent has somewhere to go.
Absolutely. This has been fascinating.
I love this.
I mean, this has been great, Todd. So
I didn't mean to out you as a brony. I apologize for that, but
it's all over the web. Just Google it. So it's all there. My life's an open book.
All right. So everyone, thanks for watching. There's been scores of you who we've seen come through.
Yeah.
Yeah, not really. No, I don't know how many are here, but I always love getting to talk to both of you. They're all Todd's friends.
Yeah.
Hi, Mom. And his mom. So thank you for coming to the first episode or watching it after the fact, after you found out how cool we were, or just see if we were.
If we're really going to show up.
We were going to show up. All right. So we're back in 2 weeks to do this again.
Absolutely.
And we'll have another star-studded guest.
Right.
We don't know who that is.
More tips and tricks.
More news, more things. Maybe maybe we'll wire in one of these computers and show you some of this nifty stuff inside of Azure next time. Push the bounds of the netcast. So anyway, Todd, very much I want to thank you for coming and chatting with us on here. You and I normally do this just hanging out every couple of weeks, but now we just got an audience. That's what Kent and I always said, that this is really just putting a camera in front of what we do every day anyway. So,
and let's not forget our wonderful producers, Drew, Tyler, and David inside the window.
David's in the pit. So that's right.
This does not happen, without really smart people.
Very grateful, because somehow Todd ended up on that screen right there.
Yeah, I did. And thanks for bringing me on. I'm honored. I can only assume the real people you wanted to show up were just busy. But it's a lot of fun. I love talking about the stuff. I love chatting with you guys. So this was a no-brainer. I'm like, yeah, I'd love to do this.
Awesome. I'm sure we'll have you back.
Fantastic.
All right, everyone. Thank you. This is Jeff DeVerter.
Kent Kingery.
For the Cloudists. Till next time.
Have a great day.